Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Followers. Here we are on episode 19, and today we have another guest for you, Padraic Colhoun. He is head coach with CrossFit Galway, and he's presenter of the Humble Coach podcast. So we're going to dive into a few questions around CrossFit today, the CrossFit community, and his career and what kind of brought him to where he is now. So welcome, Padraic.
Thanks, lads. Yeah, no, so I appreciate the shout. So I suppose, yeah, like that, I'm the head coach currently of in CrossFit Galway. We're kind of based in Oranmore, just outside Galway City. I've been there about the last maybe 7-8 years. Odds, but been involved in CrossFit, I suppose, from since about 2008. Um, the It's funny. I was only talking about it recently that I think I nearly kind of have two coaching careers, or two like different halves of a coaching career. So like I have my CrossFit coaching career, or kind of CrossFit career, which is from 2008 or so. But I've been kind of coaching on and off since I was about 16. Before that, and like working in different gyms and different sports and stuff like that. So be it in soccer and Gaelic or rugby or boxing is my main kind of sport and stuff back in the day. So a mixed bag of I suppose activities to get to where I am now. But the yeah, I suppose I started out so when I got into CrossFit at the start, it's funny. I think probably a lot of people would start with the CrossFit level one, and they'd just be looking at opening a gym and getting stuck in that kind of direction. Myself and a few friends, when I came back, I was in the States in 2007 coaching soccer, and came back, was kind of arsing around for a bit, and then moved back up to Galway, and we got into CrossFit with another lad. And at the time in 2008, there was maybe a handful of people around the country really doing it. There was a couple of gyms. There's one in Belfast, one in Dublin, a couple of lads in Cork at it, and there's maybe us kind of headbangers in Galway at it. And I'd say for the next 2 to 3 years, we were pretty much kind of based in Salt Hill. We were training on the beach, training in the park 2 or 3 nights a week. Just like horse and kettlebells around, and stones and sprints, and like all kinds of antics, using the playgrounds, and nearly kind of getting ran out a few times, and just a lot of fun like that. But at one stage, I think we had about 20 people on the beach on a Saturday morning, like just for the crack, like so. But that was all a bit mad. So there was iterations of it before and stuff, but then and a few different people had gotten kind of involved and stuff. But one of the lads then, Ronan, he I suppose there's the place I'm in at the moment kind of opened up in 2013, maybe 2012 or so officially, as a CrossFit facility, but was kind of doing a good bit of it beforehand in another area. And the owners of that, Tom French and Claudia Vinoli, were getting really into the CrossFit kind of mode, and they brought Ronan on, my friends, and then I came back. I came on board as well, then kind of 2013, and have kind of been there ever since. And at the moment, we're going through a lot of, like I was saying to the lads, we're going through a good few changes of, be it the facility look, obviously with kind of COVID situation and stuff like that, and just kind of pushing the facility on, and going even into some of the questions you guys were mentioned already about like what the future would hold, and kind of ways to work CrossFit, and what the hell CrossFit is going to look like in a few years' time compared to what it was. But that's kind of I suppose a simple background from me. I'm from Mayo as well, so for my sins, well, Mayo / Dublin actually, so it's even worse. Like,
You mentioned there kind of two coaching careers, kind of in other sports and then into CrossFit. Did they inform each other much, or did one lead to maybe change in your practices in the other? Like obviously they were at different times, but
yeah, so I think like that's one of the things, I suppose, where like I didn't do my level one for a few years, until a few years ago, really. And like I'm saying, I was, and my main sport, I suppose the kind of main sports myself and some of my family were playing when we were younger was boxing, and amateur boxing, and soccer and Gaelic football, and rugby for the kind of teenage years. And at the kind of around 16, 17, I got into that, and then I was really into it over in college and stuff like that, and then moved up to Galway and was just always kind of involved in it. But I was there's a few things, I suppose, a couple of particular coaching experiences that I remember that would help me an awful lot even now still. So I worked in Crunch Fitness, which would have been in NUI kind of maybe what 2004, 2005 maybe, or something like that, 2005. And at that point there was just a huge amount of high quality athletes and coaches and stuff around, and so being able to kind of soak that up was pretty class, and hang out with a lot of those people and really get into a good mentality about, be it both high performance and kind of regular performance. A simple example was I was teaching spinning for a while, and we'd have I don't know how controversial some of this is going to be, but sure,
Go for it.
I'm intrigued.
But it was funny. And I wouldn't be normally a great endurance athlete now. I'm not a triathlete or any of this kind of crack, but we'd teach spinning classes, and we'd have regularly some of the really high profile kind of auctioneers and property guys and stuff around Galway would come in on their lunch hours and do spinning classes. Now these guys would do 110, 100, 120, 150K at the weekend as it is, like, and they'd have all the gear and the whole lot, and they're like high performing enough kind of characters. Like, they don't mess around. Like, they're nice guys, but like they don't hang around too much. They're in and out. They want to get the snot beaten out of them, and then they want to leave. Like, so when you have to kind of push those guys to the edge, you kind of realize quickly enough what kind of maximum effort feels like, while you're talking a lot as well. So it was a bit mad and things like that. But as well as that, you're just dealing with normal people. You're dealing with really high profile kind of semi-professional athletes. A lot of the American students and stuff would be over, and you just, like any university, you're really exposed to lots of interesting characters and things like that. I suppose before I went to the States in 2007, I was doing all of my my FAI certs and stuff, and there was a point, it was a bit surreal sometimes, but I suppose I'd be a big fan of Brian Kerr and his kind of ilk, coaching wise. But Noel O'Reilly, his assistant, was on the course with us, and Park Nicholson, a few different characters. And at one stage I was playing at the back in a five-a-side with Noel O'Reilly. It was just a bit weird. It's just a bit mad. And he's just kind of shouting, go here, go this, do this, tidy this up. And I'm like, okay, this is just a bit mental. But and that, so that all of there's loads of other things like involved in loads of different sports, and I suppose different kind of gym bits and pieces. Like, try to help friends set up a few different gyms and stuff over the years. But to inform me into CrossFit, yeah, I think it gave me a huge base awareness of where people are at and where the majority of the challenges come from when it comes to somebody getting into fitness, be it a CrossFit or a particular sport or just a gym or whatever it is. Like, I suppose the main things it gives you, or it gave me at least, a really good awareness of base S&C, or at least exercise physiology, and bringing that into, I always kind of say that I don't really coach CrossFit. I suppose I coach an S&C based CrossFit, if that makes sense. It sounds a bit weird, but it's all based on, I suppose, very straightforward principles, and I try not to mess around too much with that, because you can go down the rabbit hole of kind of crazy CrossFit and just be kind of destroying people with burpees constantly and all that. But there's much better ways and much easier ways to kind of work it than just that. I know
that's music to our ears, saying stuff like that, and kind of brings us on to where we want to look at next.
You passed the test.
So, say in terms of like using that S&C base, would there be ways, and maybe just give us an overview in case there's anyone listening who doesn't know what CrossFit is, because it might be something that could, oh my God, this is the game changer that brings me into fitness. Give us that little overview, and then maybe take it towards how it could possibly benefit sports, because I know you work with a couple of field sports. You're working with ladies football team there earlier this year before it all went.
Yeah, with the Camogie team. Yeah, so I suppose the base kind of element to CrossFit. So when I describe CrossFit, it's kind of funny. I don't want to go mad on the analogies, because I was only thinking, like, I don't know if anyone saw the news last night, and George Lee loves a bit of a strange analogy about the banisters and this kind of crack, and I won't go too mad into that, but I do love a good analogy. I like to look at CrossFit as essentially kind of like World of Warcraft. It's just this epic game, and it's really, really hard to beat. It's very unlikely you'll beat the game, but you're basically combining a lot of really challenging sports or activities into an ongoing kind of game, I suppose, so to speak. So the way I like to look at it is it's basically, now there's a couple of ways to play this. First one really is, how to say it, in old CrossFit language, nearly, let's put it this way. There's old and there's kind of new CrossFit language, in my opinion. There's increased work capacity. So the goal is to increase your work capacity across broad time and modal domains, which means essentially just from 30 seconds to 3 hours doing gymnastics or weightlifting or running or cycling or whatever it is. You want to increase your general work capacity. So the work capacity improvement is the main goal or main priority. That's done by a focus on nutrition, a focus on metabolic conditioning, gymnastics, weightlifting, and then be it the actual sport or the gamification of the actual exercise, so to speak. Now, most people look and straight away go towards the Metcon, and they're like, or else the weightlifting. So they go, okay, well, I can do a 400-meter run, I can do 25 burpees, I can do 25 pull-ups, or I've like something like Murph, which some people might be kind of aware of, the workout Murph, which is your mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, another mile run. And we'll talk about the kind of details of that in a while. But basically, we're trying to, when you get into CrossFit, you're trying to build a broad general base of fitness or balance of fitness, so to speak. So you're trying to balance out all of the general physical skills. And a simple way to describe it is, imagine if you had a graph and you had 10 points on the bottom. You had strength, speed, power, and then you had 0 to 10 on the high axis, and you're basically looking at charting exactly where you're at and kind of finding out what your actual fitness is at the start, and then from there going, okay, well, how sustainable is that across time, but also where are the major weaknesses? So if something like strength is a very, very big weakness of yours, improving that so we'll look at something simple like a triathlete. Their endurance might be fantastic, maybe not necessarily their speed, their flexibility might not be the greatest, their strength might not be the greatest, but their cardiovascular endurance is phenomenal, and they might be okay at some other bits and pieces as it is, but I suppose in the CrossFit world, we wouldn't consider them very fit. We'd consider them as fit as they are balanced across the 10 general physical skills, if that makes sense, or your physical skills. So in that context, when it comes to transition over towards like a team sport or a field sport, there's probably a few different ways I think it benefits an awful lot. Now, obviously it's not going to directly benefit. Like if a team pulls in and does CrossFit only as their preseason, they are lunatics, like straight up. Because it's essentially like taking a hockey team and going, we're going to do hockey training and then we're going to play GA. It's just not the same. Like you can't do that. But that said, there's definitely parts of it where in the off season or in season, I think there is a huge amount of scope for it. I think most people underestimate the fact that it's nearly kind of a Venn diagram, essentially, like that you can have CrossFit and you can have field sports, and there's a middle piece where there definitely is a lot of crossover, and it's a bit bigger than a lot of people think. I think it's a small little part, whereas there's actually a decent size of crossover. Like there'll still be squats, there'll still be deadlifts, there'll still be an emphasis on quality. There should be, at least. There's still an emphasis on variable reps and sets and the amount of actual loading. I suppose over the last few months, I've even been more and more conscious of the amount, and I suppose, even the last few years, the amount of loading that goes into each individual session. So a simple, silly example, I suppose, is something like Murph. So now I'm not great on the numbers, so I'm not going to go too heavy duty on it when it comes to field sports. But when it comes to something like, there's two simple examples of CrossFit workouts. One's called Fran and one is called Murph. So Murph has, like I said, it's a mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, another mile run, and it's a 4-time workout. Now, when you think of the amount of actual contractions in that, so you already have 600 contractions, movement contractions in the basic calisthenics as it is. Never mind the actual foot strikes or the couple that's 4 or 5K or 5 or 6K odd running you're going to do. So something like 6,000 or 7,000 odd potentially contractions of some kind is a bit mad. So when most people look at that and go, Jesus Christ, that's a considerable amount of actual contractions you would have. Would that be the same in a field sport? Probably not. Like over the space of a week or two, maybe. But that's where, when we talk about the injury stuff, that there needs to be a certain amount of overreaching, of course, but there doesn't need that. There's a time for competition and there's a time for very much for training. The other option would be something like Fran, which is essentially 21, 15, 9 of pull-ups and then thrusters. So you're kind of front squat into push press, essentially with barbell. And you would do that over and back for time. But that's also on the other opposite end of it. So that's on like 2 to 3 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, whatever it is. If something like that workout at a moderate loading takes you 15 to 20 minutes, then there's two things at play. You're either very inexperienced or your strength is quite low, or you're just, and this is where the kind of squirrely stuff kicks in, you're early to the CrossFit game and the understanding of exactly what it is and what you're supposed to be doing, what you're there for in general. Because most people, if they want to get into CrossFit, they want to get a bit of fun, they want to get a bit more training on, or they think that they're not getting enough from their current training, they'll push into that and kind of look for another stimulus. But when it comes to the transition or the transfer into sports and into, in general, any kind of sport, I would say that the main focus should be on using it as a place to an option to shore up some weaknesses that you might have. So it's a fantastic place for off-season training, I think, for any sport. So mainly because the majority of the time, the majority of good coaches will have a base level of strength. So in our gym, for example, we would have a 6-week template of general strength that we would loop through on a pretty consistent basis. And we just kind of keep working that. So that's the foundation of it, no matter what. So all the conditioning pieces and all these other kind of mad looking things are very much the icing at the top, but they're not the sponge, I'm afraid, because it needs to be based very much on simple strength work. You get your normal consistent routine kind of going for that. Some assistance work on top of that relative to whatever the movement is. If it's squatting, then we'll kind of work on all the different variations of the squat within that, be it in the warm-up, be it in the accessory work kind of segment. Core work can kind of mix bag around it, but also then we'll complement the actual strength work with the conditioning kind of work. So I suppose a lot of the time, I think the important way to work it is for as field sport athlete, or a team sport athlete at least, is coming in with not a preconceived notion of that, okay, well, CrossFit is going to help me fix this situation. It's going to fix my hamstring strength. It's going to fix my speed, because it's probably not going to do that. I think some people look at that. That's not a realistic scenario. That said, inadvertently, it probably will if you're consistent with it. And because you're getting such a reaction to different stimulus, that it's a bit of a different stimulus, at least, you're immediately going to be able to, okay, build my bit of upper body strength, or at least maintain it. When during a normal off season, you might be much more isolated into a certain zone, if that makes sense. I don't know. That's some things I think that I would be saying for field sport athletes, is if they can use that as either an in-season thing that they kind of do once or twice a week, and it doesn't interrupt their general training, and they're obviously keeping an eye on the load, and their fatigue kind of positions and stuff. But pre-season is an amazing shout, or even that kind of off season is a super place, because it's essentially what you're doing in your normal kind of training, but you're actually maybe missing a few bits and pieces because it's so sport specific that your pre-season is kind of involved in. So I don't know, that's some thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's a really good outline of it. You mentioned the Venn diagram there, and the interlinking between what's CrossFit, what's field sports. Would you maybe touch on the key things that are in the interlinking, but also maybe some of the points that you're not going to get from CrossFit? That, like you said, like great for pre-season, but not the only thing. What are maybe some things you might be missing there?
Yeah, no, I suppose so. The big one for me there would be, and we'll probably talk about it in a while, in with the with regards to the injuries and stuff like that. So the probably the main thing really is that we'll all know this as well. The majority of straightforward kind of base S&C movements to get you either stronger or a bit faster or a bit better at muscular endurance are vitally important, regardless of what kind of age you're at or what kind of sport you're at. So there's very few sports that won't involve some level of squatting in their warm-up, their main phase, even their conditioning to a small extent. If it's flipping rugby or whatever it is, like you're squatting down to do a thrust, to jump up or whatever it is. So I think probably the main focus is there should be always an emphasis on your squat, your press, your deadlift. Now, I think the big thing really is there's a lot of CrossFit. The one nice thing about that kind of part of the Venn diagram is there's a big emphasis on the very straightforward movements. So your squat, your bench, or your floor press, which we're kind of big fans of. Your deadlifts, your RDLs, your pull-ups, your weighted pull-ups, your push-ups, your weighted push-ups. So, and then all of the accessory bits and pieces on top of that. Loads of single leg work, any kind of step-ups, any kind of single leg squats, any kind of skater squats. And I suppose it's a hard one to know sometimes, because the problem with CrossFit is sometimes there's a huge variety of different ways of doing it, or the ways that people do it. So the way I would coach it and the way I would program it is quite different sometimes than a lot of other people, because it's such an affiliate model rather than a franchise. So I can't do exactly, I'm not told by CrossFit HQ, like, you have to do this, that's the situation. Because I've been doing it for 12 years at this point, I'm very aware of exactly how to do it. And I was there at the start when all the kind of BS and stuff was going around. So I kind of have an idea of how it needs to be meshed in correctly. But like you mentioned, there's no reason for me, as far as I'm concerned, if there's any kind of field sport athletes, you can pick anybody, a corner forward, a corner back, a camogie player, a hockey player, whatever it is. They can always improve on their upper body strength. They can always improve on their single leg strength. They can always improve on their split stance strength, and their power development, be it via push presses or push jerks or split jerks or whatever it is. And the loading is all relative on that, because the emphasis is always on the positional improvement and positional quality. And I think sometimes there can be a temptation for CrossFit purists to go, look, your split jerk needs to be unbelievably amazing. And like, okay, we need to spend a bit of time on this now. We have to get you really strong at this, which is just madness, because you're not identifying that, okay, this field sport athlete is coming to you for a particular reason. Now, this is where there's a bit of a kind of a challenge. If I'm playing football, if I go to a preseason of football, then I'm expecting to play some football. So you walk into a CrossFit gym and you're going to a CrossFit class, then it's likely you're going to be expected to do CrossFit, or have at least a bit of a CrossFit mentality to it, which it depends on the coach, and it depends on the facility what type of an emphasis that is. I suppose I can only speak for my own circumstances, and we're very, very heavy duty on the quality of movements. And this goes into a couple of other questions I think you were talking about. The quality of movements pretty much trumps everything else. So the emphasis on very good basic strength, very good base energy system conditioning, without going over the top on it, not very specific depending on the field sport as such, but just general conditioning throughout the kind of various zones. We'd be big fans of that. And the main thing is we don't have an awful lot of athletes that would come in and go, okay, well, I have to use CrossFit for this. We'd have an awful lot of people who probably would have played sport in the past, or would not have necessarily, but they would actually probably be able to, they'd have the good fitness levels to be able to handle a particular field sport or something like that at even a moderate level. They may not have the skills, and the skills is always going to be the kind of deal breaker in all of these activities, but that would be the main kind of areas. So I think just that big emphasis on basic strength, on basic conditioning, on the quality of movement would be the biggest priority, by a country mile, I would say, in that context.
Possibly missing out a bit on the kind of true speed element there. Like, there's never really an opportunity in CrossFit to sprint for, like, that kind of 20, 30, 40 meter sprint. It's probably for field sport the one thing you'd identify as missing out, but it does develop so much other stuff that's why it's a great tool to improve overall conditioning, but to be your only option is probably missing out on that one thing.
Oh yeah, and I agree. Like, there's no way you would be able to utilize that as a primary conditioning option for field sport. There's no way. Like, you could, but like, and this is where I suppose we'll talk about it more in a while. But because of the length of time the CrossFit's, I suppose, been in existence, there's now a much bigger expansion into lots of different areas of speciality. So there's a gymnastic speciality. There's a lot more weightlifting specialities. There's a lot more like Chris Hinshaw, for example, with aerobic capacity is perfect for. He's a really, really fantastic person for improving the quality of your aerobic work, be it short, fast work, or long, slow, or like more distance oriented. And he's helped a huge amount of people by really working much more specifically with interval work, with heart rate monitoring and the whole lot. So there's a huge amount of more speciality characters helping out bring a better quality of awareness to that. But on the base product, yeah, like, it's not like, I'm not going to say if somebody comes into me and goes, look, I want to get faster, but I should do CrossFit for it, and I'm like, no. Now, that said, we're not going to directly impact that on their sprinting, but we know for a fact that if they have holes in their game in general, like their hamstring strength is not very good, or they have poor quality running mechanics as it is, their upper body strength is either too heavy duty, so they are actually too top heavy. There's different bits and pieces going on. They've got muscle imbalances all over the shop. Doing CrossFit on a patient and a consistent basis will help shore up those a huge amount, so that it probably could inadvertently improve your 20, 30, 40 meter time as it is. But yeah, like, it's rare enough that you're going to be spending that length of time, purely because of the type of activity it is. Like, there's such a variety of different stuff that you will sprint every so often, but it's not going to be mad common. The same as a lot of other activities.
You just mentioned there the expansion of CrossFit over time, and I know Damon has a few questions he wants to hop in with there as well, but I just think it's important that, do you think CrossFit expanded partly because the level of athlete competing, particularly as you go to CrossFit Games, it had to expand just to provide more challenges and be more all-encompassing? Or was it partly driven by the fact that some of the top athletes identified a particular strength and went a bit more in that direction? Such as, like, you now have some people competing in Olympic lifting at the Olympics, or at least continental championships, who found their way there through CrossFit. Was it partly that, or was it just to give a greater array of challenge to the top level athletes?
I think it's actually both. The second one definitely is a big one. So what you found, I suppose, and there's some mad kind of statistics and different people these days that have been putting unbelievable performance together. So we look at the current Games champions, Matt Fraser and Claire Toomey. So they have over time built quite an ability level. Now, they didn't lick it off a stamp, like, you know what I mean? Matt Fraser, for example, his parents went to the Olympics, the Winter Olympics before. He was an Olympic level weightlifter himself. Claire Toomey was a really, really high level athlete when she was younger. Now, she wasn't as spectacular as Fraser, but she was pretty high level as it was. But like I mentioned about my kind of career, they would have all had different careers, high level, high performance careers, that none of those, like, a lot of those things are going to bring into their CrossFit career. So they could play flip and tiddlywinks, and they'd be really good, and they'd be really analytical about it and how to manage the loading and how to appropriately attack it. Because I think of it this way, the amount of people doing CrossFit at a high level expanded quite a lot over a few years, because it just exploded in popularity and it was getting really interesting. And there were some really, really class athletes that were coming from really good other backgrounds, and they're going, look, I'm going to take it. I'm going to have a go at this, like, because I can handle it. You know what I mean? I've played really high level before. I'm able to do this. And that pushed them on quite a lot. But I think an awful lot more of it was some coaches and some gyms and some particular entities in the sport kind of just pushed. They were like, look, we're not waiting on everybody else. We're just doing our own thing. and they've just kind of taken off. So a simple one like Rich Froning, who would have done really, really well in the games, was won a number of times. But Tia Claire Toomey and Matt Fraser both train with him at his gym in Tennessee. And there's a phenomenal amount of other games athletes that would go there constantly to chat with them. But he also went off on his own kind of own, like he's still very much affiliated with CrossFit, but he has his own complete company and kind of whole community otherwise. But I think that's probably one of the biggest things, is that there was a need. There's a very easy recognition from a lot of coaches that, like, okay, the standard is much, much higher now. So we have to really steal an awful lot of other ideas from stuff that's like, so within the CrossFit kind of methodology, no different than a lot of other things, there's a considerable amount of weakness in it too, as in there's a number, like you mentioned about the sprinting. So there's not a big emphasis on sprinting. There's not a big emphasis on sustained Olympic weightlifting to get really, really good at that. Like, so you could spend 5 or 10 years getting really, really good at snatching and clean and jerking, and then you would be at a decent level in weightlifting, maybe not necessarily Olympic level, but you're not going to get to that point unless you dedicate that level of time to it. And when it comes to the games, one of the most interesting things, I suppose, the last couple of years is the look of the games, especially in the highest kind of levels, as being very much a job. So it's very much a straightforward, like, you go to work, you get your business done, you make your money, you get out of there. And it's very much like that shorter career kind of mentality, like a lot of sports would have. Now it's becoming more and more common. It's a lot more of a younger age group that's now involved in it. There's nobody really past 30, 32 or so odd who's performing at a phenomenal level in it. They are, but they're in the age group kind of scenario. Whereas it's now becoming, now what's happening more and more is interesting, is you have younger and younger people, 16, 17, 18, 19, getting to a really, really high level of ability. And now in the next 3 or 4 years, you're going to see some ridiculous kind of performances. And you're going to, like, you won't necessarily see a Fraser again, I don't think, but you wouldn't be a million miles away from a few different characters, like, putting some serious kind of business in over the next few years, because they just have such an awareness of periodization, such an awareness of planning and organizing, and I suppose really just breaking down the entire year. And it's very much now an event defined sport rather than just a day-to-day for them, if you know what I mean.
And even Froning himself, he played college baseball, wasn't it? So was a decent athlete in his own right.
Yeah.
He's kind of renowned now for being just an amazing programmer and periodizer. Anyway, close enough. Anyway, he's great at periodization, but he's kind of, like, as you were saying, that's become such a big thing. He kicked that off in a very big way. And I suppose the fact that Matt and Tia train with him probably speaks volumes as well.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting one. I suppose, and this is, I have kind of different opinions when it comes to the programming side of things. So the programming is a weird one, because CrossFit's an inherently challenging sport to program for, as it is. So it, like, we'll say with a GA team or with a soccer team or something like that, you have very confined restraints of exactly what it is. You have 11 players, you have very positional specific, you have potential amount of mileage per game that such and such would be taking on, so you can really kind of tighten back and go, okay, this is exactly what each player needs to be doing as a base level of volume or speed work or whatever it is. When it comes to CrossFit, though, you have such a mixed bag. Like, there is I suppose a certain amount of exercises or a typical enough type of framework of workouts that will come up regularly enough. So there's always going to be pull-ups, there's always going to be burpees, there's always going to be power snatches, there's always going to be some running, whatever it is. So you can kind of factor those in, but you actually have to look at, I think a lot of the time when it comes to programming CrossFit, you have to look back at the actual movements that are likely to come up, and then where the person is at that. So you can't actually, it's a hard one to force the athlete to the point of the games, because, or I suppose to the games level, because you're basically just trying to shore up exactly what the weaknesses are with the individual athletes. So someone like Matt and Tia, for example, is hilarious, because both of them over the last few years have just improved on their own qualities. They're not really that stressed about the competition They're very much filling in their own gaps. So I look at it. This sounds a bit mad, but I meant to say it kind of towards the start. But for me, CrossFit is like, do you know when you defrag the computer and all the little squares come up, little boxes come up, and they're like, some of them are green and some of them are grey and some of them are red and the whole that kind of thing like that. Do you guys know what I mean by that? That's essentially what I look at when I see a person coming into CrossFit. I'm like, okay, well, how dodgy is your hard drive at the moment, and how much progression is there potentially available? How much white space is there available? And someone like me, Matt and Tia, they didn't have a huge amount of white space, but essentially it's like getting to 99%, and then it goes 99.01%, 99.02%. So they're at that level, and when you get to that point, then it becomes very significant periodization. But I think a huge amount of it comes more towards their interest in that. So like Shane Orr, who's Tia's husband, programs for them, and he's a fairly savvy dude, but like he's always mentioned that he's looking for the tiny little pieces. He's like looking for a small little bit more knee bend in that power snatch compared to 5 kilos of a jump or whatever it is, you know what I mean? So at all levels, it's like if I go out playing hurling now, I'm not a hurler. If I go out playing hurling now, my skill level is extremely low compared to inter-county hurlers. So, but my conditioning could easily be relatively decent in a period of time. But I think the programming element of it, I think the real crux of it is in the skills improvement and the awareness improvement, like so the mental improvement of actually looking at themselves as professional athletes and as gamers, if that makes sense, nearly to an extent. So that's, I think Froning is fantastic, but I think he recognizes that it's the game you're trying to beat rather than the other athletes.
Well, I think kind of as maybe earlier days, because Tia's kind of taken over a bit now, but early days CrossFit maybe a few years ago, it was much more interesting on the women's side of things, because I feel how it was programmed would determine the winner much more. Whereas for like 10 years now, the men's one has either been dominated by Froning or Fraser. But the women's one I felt was so, not sport dependent, but like you could see different people had different strengths. It was really interesting to see how people dealt with how it was programmed.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it was. I think it will be again in time, because there's a lot of really interesting younger athletes now. Kind of depend. This I think where it kind of depends on where the new CEO kind of wants to take it and where the games are kind of going to end up, because I suppose a simple example was there was a thing years ago, and it's kind of still a little bit going, but it went a bit dodgy for a while. There was a thing called the Grid League, and kind of primarily based in the States, did a little bit in Europe and stuff as well, but basically essentially just fitness racing. So it's CrossFit for kind of racing essentially. So you'd have a grid set up in the whole lot, and your team would start on one end. You go through all these challenges, mad looking challenges, and then go to this. It's like a tiny mini Ninja Warrior in the space of like 30 meters. And that would look class at the time, but it got to a point where it just got so excessive in mad stuff. Like you were just doing backflips onto a 30-inch box, then doing really heavy dumbbell snatches, then you're doing rope climbs, with one arm. And like just it got hectic. Now don't get me wrong, it's really cool and stuff, fun to watch, but that's where the games could have gone, and they went, oh Jesus, that's a bit fucking sketch. And they've gone much more towards a more accessible and acceptable choice of testing fitness, if that makes sense. And I think that's only going to improve more and more as it goes on, because the caliber of athletes is only going to get better, and they're much more informed. Like even the simple scenario of social media over the last few years has made a huge difference to the awareness of younger athletes, exactly what they should be doing. Now, some of it on a negative level, absolutely, but a lot of it on a very positive level, because if they're able to listen to any of these really high level coaches, be it weightlifting coaches or running coaches or whatever it is, about base quality technique and conditioning and stuff like that, it's only going to bring everything kind of on a huge amount. So I think it will improve again, but I think it needed a watershed couple of characters to push the button and to kind of push the boat on a bit. Yeah, definitely.
That's a good point on Matt and Tia as well. Just like bringing that level of introspection to their own trend. They're not worried about the games. They're not worried about what anyone else is doing. They're just identifying their own weaknesses and focusing entirely on improving them. It's kind of a good philosophy for training in general, to adapt to your own sport or activity or whatever it might be anyway.
Yeah.
Just last bit on that, kind of at the top level, how come particularly in females it's just like the females from Iceland are so strong? Is it because they don't really have a national sport? Was there just a big push on CrossFit a few years ago that we're seeing the fruition of it over the last few years, or what led to
Kind
that?
of, yeah. There's probably a couple of things I think. We talked a little bit about this actually, John, there recently, about the role model type of scenario. And I think, so it definitely works. So there's different parts of the world that definitely I think are more apt and open to being influenced by CrossFit. So I think there's something like Brazil. Like CrossFit's unbelievably huge in Brazil. But that's very much because they're very active in general. Like their gym situation is very active. They love playing lots of different sports, be it volleyball, be it soccer, be it whatever, you know what I mean? And they're very interested in that, and also very interested in the gamification of it, the intensity levels that come from it an awful lot. The perceived coolness of it is a huge part as well. And I think Iceland to an extent as well, like it's not much and all as CrossFit can be looked on as an every person sport. It's not really on the games level. It's not really for really poor people. Let's put it that way, because you can't afford loads and loads of gear. Like it's going to cost you a flipping bomb, and to fly around the world to get all of these things. Like it's not at an unbelievably high professional sport level where there's that much money flowing around. Whereas things like Iceland, though, when you have a pocket of a number of athletes that are really, really good quality. This is what's happening in Tennessee as well, and a few different places, and in certain parts of England, certain parts of Europe and stuff that, and it happened in a few different places before in the States, that they just have such an amount of quality athletes that they just bounce off each other so much, and they also have really, really good. Now, I think a big part of it is also the evolution of the structure of the games and the regionals and the sanctionals and how it's actually been played like that. Because Europe for ages so it's always been America against the rest of the world, pretty much. And it still is. Like there's a huge amount more Americans doing it than anybody else. Like China is barely touched. You know what I mean? India's barely touched. All of these, like Russia's barely touched. Like, so you have these unbelievable amounts of other people that haven't even gotten awareness of what's going on with this. You know what I mean? So you have all these unbelievable athletes that are sitting there going, well, I've never heard of CrossFit. What are you talking about? And they'd come in and they'd win the games in that with 3 months exposure to it. So in time that would expand. But when it comes to the Icelandics, like it helps that, but I think with the Icelandics, what you have is you have a lot of those kind of characters that went and looked into, had a good amount of introspection from the word go. So they were getting good S&C from the word go. So they were already aware of exactly how to train correctly for this. They looked at it as a game immediately, as another sport straight away, rather than just like smashing yourself into a wall. And over the space of a couple of years, they'll realize, oh, Jesus, okay, I have to train a bit differently for this game. No, they went straight away from the word go. They were like, okay, well, if we're going to be good at this, this is what we need to do straight away. And that shows because they were able to make such good progress in it. But I think a lot of that comes back to they recognized that it was a niche sport that they could do some damage in, and they went, we're going after this. Like, that's my opinion, because they were able to do that.
There are a lot of strongmen come out of Iceland as well, aren't there? So it's kind of that strength focused kind of sport, I suppose, is probably ingrained in them to a degree as well. The same way probably we'd look at us when we GA, it's kind of the field sports are kind of ingrained in us to an extent. Are we kind of covered on the kind of the top end there, solids? I suppose my interests really are at the exact opposite end. So you spoke about, you know, your GA athlete or your rugby athlete coming in, or your camogie player coming in, and while in their own right in their own sport they can be quite top end, but when they step into a CrossFit gym, the skill development that is required for so many of the exercises, for pretty much whether it's S&C or whether it's CrossFit, the skill development might not be there. But often, I suppose there is this kind of view that we're going in to just go, like it's just going in and we're going to go, and that's it. And you might kind of, I've come across, I suppose, people who have maybe not played any sports in school or something like that, and they're like, oh, I'm going to take up CrossFit, and they have this idea that's just in and go. And I suppose my question for you there is coaching that, managing that, and from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like a lot of people who are just kind of look at CrossFit as just a way of training and exercise, and I'd love to be sending them up to Galway to you, because I see people go into gyms and they go in with this, we're just going to go in and go, and they go in and that's exactly what happens. And the skill development, the learning the movements, the learning how their body moves, how to improve on their techniques, how to improve on their flexibility, mobility, all these things get kind of, pushed to one side, because like we're here to work, we're here to go. How, like, you seem to have that nailed. How do you find that in the CrossFit community in general, that like it seems to be, a little bit like one gym is fantastic and then another place is just like, well, we come here to make people sweat and just push them through wads. It's that first day athlete is the person I'm really interested in there.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think I've heard it before that CrossFit's for anybody, but not for everybody. And the same as like anything. Like I wouldn't be a huge fan. Let me see, think of a sport that I don't like that much. There's not too many sports I don't like, but there's probably a couple that I'm like, that's been annoying. Like I don't really like that. Like this sounds a bit weird, but rugby league, I'm not actually a huge fan of, because I'm like, I don't really watch an awful lot of it. So I'm like, okay, well, that's possibly one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of it. If I watched it loads and I understood it more, I'd probably love it. I'd be like, oh, this sounds great. I have to say, some of the time, I think the challenge, well, first of all, when it comes to somebody getting into it in general, my main priority is always on the quality movement. And we'll talk a little bit, I think, go back to the actual higher level people. And I'm like, so I look at the highest, I look at the Olympics. The Olympics would be a huge interest for me. And I look at people that are doing really well in the Olympics. Now, they're either on drugs or they're really unbelievable athletes or whatever it is. But the majority of the time, they're unbelievable movers. So they're really, really efficient movers. So there's no big energy leaks or anything like that. Now, that said, there is probably a lot of them that if we broke it down and got really into the biomechanics, we're like, oh, their foot angle was all over the shop and their knee was dodgy. And oh my God, they're really bad for this. And you know what I mean? We can get into all this kind of mad stuff, but when you pick a sport like CrossFit, you can't really get away with not being extremely efficient. Really quality mover. Like if you're not a quality mover, you're going to get found out and you're going to get exposed at some point, no matter what it is. So Fraser and Tia are quality movers. Like if you look through their movement, there's nothing technically really that bad about them. They're really, really good quality, clean movers, and they understand that that's a vital part. That's the gateway to getting to putting all the load on, all the speed on, all the whatever. The day one person is a hard one, definitely, and it takes a huge amount of patience to get that. But I think the biggest thing is, I explain to people from the word go in the fundamental session, I'm like, lads, you've chosen a really, really hard sport here. Like, are you okay with this? Like, and they're like, what? And like, I just want to get fitter. And I'm like, okay, well, perfect. If you want to get fitter, then you need to have this mentality about it. Like, you need to come in 3 or 4 times a week. You just turn up, do what you can. Don't stress about it. Don't get dragged into the hype and all the BS of like everyone else giving it loads, putting on all the fucking blue plates and just giving it socks. Like, just chill. Listen to us. Let us guide you. But if we say go and put the foot on the pedal, then put the foot on the pedal. If we say just hang tight a bit there, then really hang tight and kind of save yourself. So basically, I suppose I look at it and get people to get to the point where you're either a person who does CrossFit every so often, or you're a CrossFitter. And if you're a CrossFitter, you can be the lunatic who's in 6 days a week, 7 days a week. You're like, I need to do more. I need to do more burpees because my snatch isn't great, but I need to do more burpees because of that. Like, and I need to do more running. And like, well, no. You need to you need to watch yourself doing the fucking snatch first, then watch yourself doing the running, then check with your coach or talk to somebody else about it. Like, look on YouTube and go, come here, what does a snatch actually supposed to look like? Look at some good athletes doing, like, you know what I mean? All of this, the problem really is most people that come into a CrossFit gym will have some preconceived notion of what it is, but a lot of people nowadays won't have any preconceived notion of what it is. It's just another gym. They don't give. They're like, yeah, I just like I look class on you on Instagram, sound, and they're like, okay, well, that's fine, but then our duty of care really is to make sure people are safe and steady, and I think the first thing is I ask a lot of time I'll ask and find out what some of the bugbears are, not necessarily what their mad initial goals are, but like what's an interesting thing that you'd like to get to, like what version of you is an interesting version that will kind of drag you over to it. Because if you turn around and go, look, I want to just lose a bit of weight and get a bit fitter, and like, well, what exactly does that look like? As in, are you better like at running 5 miles? Are you better at lifting? Are you better at playing with the kids? Are you better at sleeping? Whatever it is. I think really identifying, first of all, where people are at and not being afraid to kind of expose them to go, look, okay, well, this is a lot of work here. Like, are you okay with this? Like, we'll happily help you, but it's not a short situation. Like you're coming into a very complicated game, and if you like games or you're into that kind of stuff, happy days, you'll be fine. But a lot of the time, you're going to be lots of bumps and bruises. So you're okay. I kind of look at it and go, look, give it a couple of years nearly. And they're like, oh my God, a couple of years. And I'm like, well, look, think of it this way. Think of the amount of what kind of a person you'd be in a couple of years with this consistency and this level of skill that you just layer on slowly but surely. You'd be a flipping beast, like, you know what I mean? And you'd be a very different person. So I think a lot of the time when it comes to the person from day one, my focus and my goal is always to get them curious, but a little bit nervous about what they're getting into. Because if you're not a bit nervous about what you're about to do, then you're not really that switched on about it. You're able to just stand on a fucking cross trainer and just tip away for an hour. You know what I mean? I think the activities that you're involved in, you're going to need to be some level of switched on. Like this podcast, I'm a little bit switched on now, whereas if I'm just chatting to somebody else, I'm like kind of a bit more relaxed, you know? And CrossFit's not an easy thing to do in the true sense of the word, but there's loads of ways that it can be done, regardless of what age you are. For 7-year-olds to 70-year-olds, like a squat is still a squat. Some of the younger people are going to be able to squat loads. Somebody else is going to have to squat to a box. They're like, no problem, that's fine. I'm just getting up out of a chair every day, so I'm doing some level of CrossFit when you can construe it like that. If you know what I mean, if I do that fast enough.
Have you noticed any common movement deficiencies with first timers coming in that you're like, okay, these are the kind of 2 or 3 things I nearly always need to be aware of? And just like jumping out at me, I'm assuming lack of ankle and thoracic mobility are the bigger ones, but what have you noticed?
Yeah, no. Well, the ankles to an extent. See, for me, the big one is obviously the shoulders are a huge issue in general. Like most people's thoracic spine is pretty sketch, mine included. Like it needs loads of work, tons of work. But that said, I think there's an awful lot more. The concept of bracing through the midline into the abdomen and lower back and glutes it's pretty desperate. Like, and an awful lot of that is just because you will have either people sitting down an awful lot, or they'll be coming in from work, and then there's this kind of shoot to the energy level is going to this, and they're like, well, if you're spending 9 hours, maybe 10 hours, because you're either driving to work, you're sitting down in the office. Like if I sat down for 10 hours and then I jump up and I'm doing a load of bits and pieces, my lower back goes crazy. Like I'm sure you guys are in similar boats, you know what I mean? If you're sitting down for that long and you don't be patient about the warming up, it can be quite a challenge. Most of the time though, the problem really is movement specific, and the general kind of rule of 2 or 3 times pulling to pushing is always recommended. That kyphotic position is very, very difficult to get back out of, and it takes an awful lot of time to pull it back out. So we have to, in the programming, pull that slowly but surely back. So I think a lot of the time, sometimes CrossFit gyms stick with the tried and tested kind of old way, I think, of doing it and just smashing people. And I'm like, no, you got to recognize what's happening with people in the world in general, and where people like are in our population, and what exactly impact that's going to have. So I put a ton of burpees in for a group on a consistent basis. I deserve what I get, which is really bad postural situations and bad wrists. That said, if I don't do my due diligence and I don't mention to them, come here, move your hand out a little bit more like that, so it's actually not destroying your shoulder by pulling you into that position, on a consistent basis, it means straight away there's a little bit less pressure on their wrists. So I'm obviously aware that they will have challenges, movement specific wise or mobility wise in the shoulder or whatever, the wrist. But I'm finding a way to make sure that they can continue on that, and then and be able to maintain some consistency in it. But I'm able to I suppose to figure out a sequence of progressions that I can get them back to a good level of that position, rather than just being like, come here, I need you to go there, and that's the situation. Like, it's very difficult to get that straight out the gap. Like, it's going to take some time and lots of little touch points to get them to the point where they're aware of exactly what that movement should be like in the efficiency positions, if that makes sense. So that's where I think the difficulty is always, it's always identifying where somebody's at and kind of looking at them and stuff like that. And I would be at this point now, we so used to kind of checking somebody out and identifying from the word go, like do a squat, and like the warm up always informs me a country mile more than any amount of 2-hour assessments or any of this kind of crack. Like, because we know on ourselves to what movements to put in to expose people. So something like a simple inchworm to a push up, like people break their hearts about that. So if they can't do the push-up after the inchworm, or they can barely get down to the inchworm, you realize, okay, well, it's something else going on. It's a lower back issue. It's a knee flexion issue. It's a hip flexion issue that they have. That's possibly because of abdominal fat, etc. Like, there's loads of different pieces to it. It's even something like adductor strength, and they're like, well, okay, you widen your feet out, do a walkout, an inchworm walkout, and people are like, oh my god, I can barely get out to there with my feet, never mind putting my hands on the ground. So identifying those bits and pieces immediately straight away gives me much more information of exactly what level they need to be introduced at, or what level of recommendation I need to give them when it comes to the actual repetitions or the quad. Like, I'd have no issue whatsoever with anybody squatting to any height of any kind. None. It's absolutely specific to the person. Now, does it mean that if somebody like kind of does a little half squat, that they can do more and they should do more, and I can recommend they do more? I just have to find a way of getting them to do more if I think that that's appropriate and they can handle it. It's not that they have to do it. It's not that they should do it. It's that it's probably better off if they are able to hit a better range of motion in general for their quality of movement. But if I speak to them like that, they're going to be like, man, what are you talking about? So I just have to have a different way of kind of working it. Does that make sense?
Damien only quarter squats.
What? Well, that's a lie. I've my next kind of thought or question for you, and this is actually my biggest interest in CrossFit, is I come from a sporting background. I mentioned it to you before we got going to it, but I come from a sporting background, team sports, rugby, soccer, football, basketball. I did a bit of athletics as well, which would be obviously a little bit more individual. But one of the things that about team sports is the community spirit. There's a community connection. There's a I lived over in New York for a while. I was in the GA community straight away over there. I didn't have to go looking to try and make friends or anything like that. You just go over and straight in. CrossFit is one of the few gym settings. It's one of the few gym floors where that is paramount. That's huge. You can go anywhere, and I often think of the meme that goes around with the two Spider-Mans pointing at each other, and it's like, just, you do CrossFit, and like people can meet anywhere, and it connects them. Whereas you don't get that with your normal gym goers or anything like that. You don't see that connection. But what is it about CrossFit that has really developed such a big and strong community spirit so quickly? As I said, all those other sports, they're around for so long. It's just consistent development over time. But CrossFit has just come in and bang! It's here we have this tight knit, broad community. What are your kind of thoughts on that, or how it's kind of developed?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually equate CrossFitters to gamers, like to e-gamers these days, like esports. And it purely because like we're looked on as a bit kind of weird. We talk a bit too much about our own sport. It's a bit quirky and it's a bit odd because most normal S&C or team sports would be like, man, these fake CrossFit weirdos are giving it like, what are they at? Like, you know, they're just trying to mix too many bits together, like, and do stuff. Which which in turn I think makes us build a bit more camaraderie when it comes to that kind of context. But I actually think it's a bit more towards the gamification that I mentioned at the start. So it's such a big game and such a big challenge that it's kind of a bit mad. Nearly only certain people have won the game, if you know what I mean. So there's only some superheroes that have won the game, and you're like, or they at least finished certain levels. So the rest of us are like, man, how do we fucking get to this fucking level here? What's going on here? Like, we have to play this together. And we realize we're very much kind of all in it together because we recognize the challenge of the event and the workout. And there's nothing to be fair now, and this sounds a bit kind of funky, but the combination that combination of gymnastics, weightlifting, conditioning, a lot of the time the potency of it is unbelievably different than a normal team sport or sprinting or whatever it is, because you have to be thinking so clearly about exactly what you're doing to be able to make progress in it. You have to be very, very present. So it sounds funny, but I look at certain CrossFit workouts as the same as actually like a 60-meter sprint. Like, you have to be there. Like, you're in the middle of that sprint. If you're not, like, if it's like a tackle, if you're not fully aware of it, you're going to get hurt. Like, you're going to miss a lift, you're going to miss a box jump or something like that, or you're going to miss your squats are going to be all over the shop. You're not going to be in good consistent flow. And I think there's been a way to access a level of flow that is hard to find a lot of the time. And I think when people get a taste for that, they realize, Jesus, lads, I'm all over this. And they kind of, I think people are inherently positive, and they want to show that to everybody. So that's why we talk about it constantly. We're like, man, you should get into this. Like, it'd be so good, it'd be class. Like, you'll get your ass absolutely handed to you, but it feels great afterwards. Like, you might be a bit sore, but man, it's so cool, like, you know. But more so than that, if somebody is suffering through it, we're very aware of exactly how difficult it is. So we're very conscientious about it, and like, look, we know where you're going at. I think a big part of it as well comes back to the skill development, and there has to be such a cross-pollination of knowledge and awareness and different little tips and tricks to get better at certain movements. So we're all essentially trying to help each other out in this game to get better at the game, because the game is bigger than us essentially. I think that's one of the reasons why it's a bit of crack. Like, it attracts a certain type of character that likes the kind of quirkiness of it and likes the challenge and likes kind of going, look, come here, let's see what the story is here, like, you know, getting after it. And it's a bit different. I think it also is, it's quite a fun challenge, because you don't, like, day to day, you don't really know what's coming up. And that level of anticipation is hard enough to find in real life for most people. Like, we naturally expect certain challenges, but it's like having a fight every single day, and you have to fight a different person each day, and you're like, man, what the hell? Like, you got to change your skills quite a lot, and you got to expect a lot of kicks a lot of punches in the face. And only if you're a really, really good all-rounder are you going to get away with that on a daily basis. But it's even just kind of the psyching yourself up for that. We just need that solace as well, that we have somebody alongside us kind of knowing how it feels. I think that's a big one.
That's class. I suppose after that, then the only kind of thing, and it kind of comes a little bit from the community aspect of it as well, is I suppose majority of my work is nutrition based, and it's one area that, right, you know, whether it's rugby, football, soccer, wherever it is, I get, you know, different things coming at me. I have private clients, so you get random things coming at you the whole time. But with CrossFit, I see communities of people who have almost a nutrition belief system develop a little bit more. Whereas, you know, say if I take the GA, for example, every single person could have a little bit of a different idea on what they should be doing, and then you'll have one or two outliers who are kind of really question. You're like, what are you at? But with CrossFit, say, if I take a look at, say, the ketogenic diet, which really kicked off there a few years ago, or the vegan diet, stuff like that, you find big pods of people in the CrossFit community who will just go, this is the diet, to follow, or paleo diet or something like that this is the diet that we need for life and for CrossFit and everything, that often people can stick into that extreme side. Is it something to do with just the community aspect that everyone buys in together, or is it just kind of nutrition hasn't kind of gone as or hasn't kind of established itself as securely as it probably should in the CrossFit community just yet?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of things when it comes to that. So I would definitely say that over the last number of years, it's evolved quite a bit. I think I kind of look at CrossFit as like, this sounds a bit strange, but kind of as a rolling stone that has kind of hit a bit of a plateau, and then it got someone like just kind of, they can booted it there this year. They were like, fucking, let's go. So it's nearly, it's about to go absolutely flying in evolution, because it's going to be pushed to that point. Like, so it's had its teething problems. It's had its kind of crazies kicking around in it in different areas. And yeah, I think a lot of the time when it comes back to the isolation or the specificness of certain types of nutrition, certain types of training, certain types of methodology, there's been a kind of flavor of the month, pardon the pun, but at lots of different stages over the evolution the last few years. I think sometimes there definitely is, the problem sometimes with CrossFit, because it's a niche enough kind of activity, it can definitely attract certain people that realize, okay, well, I can impact my beliefs on a lot of these people now, because they're quite open and there's not a huge amount of awareness around it. They're quite susceptible to a certain persuasion, and we can go after them. So even the simple mentality of the likes of the zone diet as being one of the first nutrition kind of protocols that was emphasized in the early CrossFit days, and it still is to an extent, absolutely. But the main reason that was identified at the start, and most people kind of underestimate it, is because it was weighing and measuring of food. So it was a trackable way of improving nutrient quality. But it immediately gets kind of gets brought down because of some of its negatives connotations as well. So it means that the people that don't like tracking and monitoring all of this are going, man, that's BS, because I don't like doing that. For a lot of people it works hugely well. I think at the moment though, and I think over the next few years, there's a much bigger emphasis on coaching of nutrition than recommending a specific direction of it. I think that's becoming more and more aware. People are becoming more and more aware that's where the important quality is, because a lot of high level and experienced coaches have tried all of these different ways, the zone diet, the paleo diet, or whatever it is, and very specific ways, very specific protocols, and just doing that for a certain amount of time, which is fine. But like, how sustainable is all of that, and how applicable is that for each individual person, is much more important. And I think even the whole concept of that it requires coaching rather than prescribing is a better way of looking at it. Because if I just get a sheet and it's like, right, this is the paleo diet, just follow that, like, it's highly unlikely I'm going to follow that, unless I have a real urgency unless I have a belief that it's going to do that. The majority of the time though, the belief, most people I think will go back to the belief in, like, hang on, that sounds like BS there. Whereas if there's a coach telling me the very basics of fats, protein, and carbs, and exactly what it does for your system, this makes you go fast. This makes you go a bit, possibly like this. Mike Milan, I was talking to recently, he recommended, the way he talks to his players is like, a higher protein day is a higher repair day. A higher carb day is your fuel day. Like, it's essentially in that mentality, you know what I mean? If there's much more of a heavy conditioning emphasis, then yeah, you need to carb up before that if that's going to be your focus. If there's the recognition of fat levels and the recognition of the amount of protein and what it's there for, like, because it always gets this kind of strange connotation of like, okay, well, these guys everyone should be taking protein shakes to get such and such. We're like, well, what are you doing this for? Like, and I think that's where there is a growing up definitely of exactly what, and I think people like Matt and Tia and things like that have forced everyone's hand to go, okay, well, lads, these guys are so far ahead. What the hell is going on here? And they're like, well, I'm just eating normally. And I'm getting coached on my eating relatively straightforwardly. You know what I mean? I'm not living like Fraser got asked a few different times. He's like, what kind of nutrition protocol? And he's like, man, I'm just eating what I need to eat. Like, and I'm just educating myself on exactly what's working for me via my coaches and stuff. Like, to say he doesn't have a nutrition coach is lunacy. Of course he does have some kind of a nutrition coach, but he's not following paleo only as verbatim. You know what I mean? It's ludicrous to look at that. So I think that's one of the biggest things that will be happening over the next few years is the concept of coaching of nutrition rather than and consistent awareness of exactly. And I think this is where it's going to mesh a bit more with a lot more sports. There is definitely a lot more of a crossover into it. Like you said, John, at the start, that Venn diagram, the nutrition part now is going to be a big element of that, because it's not it just goes down to the demands of the sport all the time. And the more people look at it like that, the more it'll go in that direction, I think.
That famous line by James Morton, fuel for the work required.
Yeah.
And even like, it's interesting that they say that I'm just eating normally, but what has become normal to them has probably changed a lot since as knowledge around nutrition has grown over the past 10 years, along with CrossFit and everything that way. Yeah. It's probably as well important that, like, when we talked just there about why CrossFit has grown, particularly through the community aspect, and that I see this being related a bit to self-determination theory and your autonomy, competence, relatedness, and that, and you liken it to a game. You want to move up through the levels of the game. You're getting better, you're increasing your competence, but you're doing it with a group of people and their relatedness. And the autonomy can tie in that if you're prescribed a diet or prescribed the same workout all the time, you have no autonomy in that and you lose interest. Where, like, I assume with some of your better athletes, they work with you a bit in designing their workouts and work with you a bit in designing their long-term periodized plans. Same as, like, I assume Matt Fraser does it, Rich Froning as well, and gives them that sense of autonomy. And they want the same in their food. Like, realistically, you need to eat your whatever 160 grams of protein a day. But whether that comes from a shake, chicken, steak, whatever, leave that up to the person to give them the autonomy around what suits them best. And ultimately, that leads to more, long-term chances of sticking with it.
Well, no, that's exactly it. As in the buy-in scenario is huge, because you want to make it so that it's accessible to people. So and that's where I suppose it's not a case of forcing someone to, like, so if someone is relatively advanced, or they, like, say a field sport athlete. I know a number of field sport athletes that train with us in the gym, and they can do a lot of movements. They can do the pull-ups, they can do some snatches, they can do loads of push-ups, and whatever it is, they can do a lot of good movements. Their movement isn't bad. So I'm not gonna, if they just start from day one, I'm not starting them at absolute zero. I'm not bringing them all the way back to absolute zero. There's no point in doing that. But I have to be more conscious then of, like, okay, well, know that they have a certain amount of awareness of movements, but this is still a hard game. You just maybe 3 or 4 levels into the game, like, you know what I mean? But a huge amount of it comes back to the, I suppose, the patience required for everybody to get to that point in time of progression. Because the most challenging point is when you say something like a toes to bar, or even a pull-up, and the 0 to 1 strict pull-up is very different than the 1 to 3 strict pull-ups, than the 3 to 10 strict pull-ups, and extremely different than the 3 to 5 kipping pull-ups, 15 to 20 kipping pull-ups. Like, it's an absolute world of difference. Like, they're massive chasms with bridges there, but the bridges are sketchy as hell. And unless you are really okay with going that far across the bridges, like, do most people need 25 kipping pull-ups? No, they don't. They just straight up don't. But if they're interested enough in it, okay, well, then they're going to need to do the work for it, and they're going to need to accept that this is the challenge that you're taking on, and you need to have all of these different attributes. You need to have strong hands. You need to improve your grip strength. You need to improve your shoulder strength. You need to improve your quality of skill that you're actually doing to get these. It's not a case of one or two. If you're going to be on the pull-up bar for a minute doing 25 kipping pull-ups, can you hang off the bar for a minute? Can you hang off the bar while swinging for a minute? Like all of these different bits and pieces. I suppose that's where our jobs as coaches is to break it down steadily but surely, and still give enough light at the end of the tunnel that you're going to get there, but be also quite realist in the approach. It's a tough one.
Yeah. No, I'm just conscious of your time there now. This is this has been excellent. Like I've been like there's a few times I just want to sit back and be like, oh, I'm just letting you go. I don't want to ask any more questions.
You're thinking you're like the crazy CrossFit guys just raving off again. So
I have one question for you, Padraic. It's a bit of a strange one, but I'll let you deem if it's strange or not. But CrossFit, given that it's so technical in so many different aspects, there seems to be a relatively low barrier to entry to becoming a CrossFit coach. So it might be the problem of kind of being more an affiliate than the game itself. But then the second part of that is, do you find an issue with, say, for example, if someone did a CrossFit class in Cork with a bad coach, they're more likely to say, I don't like CrossFit at all, because it's probably all the same everywhere. Whereas if they did an S&C class in Cork, they're very unlikely to go, right, S&C is bad, I'm never going to do S&C again. So do you find issues with that?
Yeah, no, very much. Like it's so there's at the moment kind of 14,000 odd CrossFit gyms around the world. So no different than you guys with lots of different. If we looked at 14,000 different teams, like the quality of some of those coaches is going to be obscenely bad compared to obscenely good. And I suppose I have tried, and I continue to try to be around as smarter coaches as possible and learn as much as possible from them, because again, it's just like anything. If I go into like with the camogie team that I was working with at the start of the year, like I wouldn't be a huge camogie person before that, but I'm very aware that it is a field sport. These are the demands. This is such and such. This is what's required. This is where they're at, and identifying where they're at and so on. And I just do my due diligence of educating myself on exactly how I should be training these athletes. The problem with CrossFit sometimes, yes, is it's a very easy kind of barrier to entry. But I think the problem, it can be a low enough barrier to entry. The problem, a lot of the time, that can be found out quite quickly, though. And one of the challenges we have at the moment, I think, is that you'll have a lot more coaches that are into it, and they are starting to get into it at an earlier age, so to speak. So their experience level would not be very, very big. That said, we also have an awful lot of people who don't have any background in CrossFit or awareness, like I mentioned earlier on, and they're coming in now from lots of different activities, be it from swimming or cycling or football or whatever it is, or just general gym. So they don't really have a very high expectation for what it is or what the coaching is. So when they receive good coaching, they're like, Jesus Christ. Or else they actually are like, I don't know, I didn't even know the difference really there between a good coach and a bad coach, because we're just supposed to be doing burpees all the time anyways. Yeah. And so
being shouted at.
Yeah. So the kicker really, I think, comes back to the experience levels. Like I suppose that you guys are the same. You put yourself in a position where you're learning from the best people, but you're also taking like some of the coaches that I've learned from recently. I've taken some of their ideas, and then the rest I'm like, that doesn't apply to me at all, because I just don't need it. Like or else I'm not ready at that stage yet. I have to build 2 or 3 more blocks before I get to that point. So if you start asking me about velocity-based training, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not overly savvy on it. I'm aware of it, and I know exactly what it is, but am I able to really program for it? I'm not going to say I am straight off, because I haven't spent that time doing it, That said, I'm sure if I needed to dig into it, I would spend a few months at it and kind of go, okay, I'm going to learn from who's at what, how does it apply exactly, what have I used, what have I done in my previous experience that's going to help me and guide me in the right direction with that. That's probably the biggest challenge, all right, is there is a lot of absolute cowboys and cowgirls tipping around. It can be quite challenging especially when the perception is of what CrossFit is. And I suppose that's one thing I like to kind of do with people is educate them and go, okay, well, look, this is exactly what you're trying to do. Like this is a game you're trying to get involved in. You're a human being exploring this game, but you're also the one playing the game. It's not a case of like, well, somebody else is going to do those exercises. Like you need to take care of this. And if you're not okay with this, then if you want to just go walking, that's fine. If you want to go swimming, that's fine. I'm not going to be annoyed at you. You know what I mean? Or if you're a field sport athlete, I'm not going to get anyway. If somebody's active, perfectly fine. But if somebody comes in and goes, look, I want to do CrossFit, but I want to do my kind of CrossFit. And I go, what exactly is your kind of CrossFit? And they go, well, I don't really know. And you're like, well, then you just talk out your ass, you know what I mean? Or the opposite end of it is you'll have a lot of coaches who will just go back to the very early days and they will just live verbatim off exactly what it should be. And you're like, well, it's an affiliate model for a reason. It means that there's this open source model. So you can do what the hell you want. Obviously, you have to base it on straightforward principles of exercise phys and stuff. But rather than just hockeying people for the sake of it and just being a kind of egotistical character when it comes to that, I think it's a poor way of approaching it. There is a big challenge to that, but I think it will improve over time as people become more educated on what good CrossFit is and what bad CrossFit is. I hope.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Okay.
To be fair, what you hear from like the majority of CrossFit boxes now is very positive. It's kind of people at home doing their own workouts that has just a random pile of exercises thrown together to make you as sweaty and as sore as possible. It's where kind of the poor side of CrossFit is seen now, but the actual standards in the gyms is, I think, really kind of professionalized in the last few years. Well, from my outside perspective on anyway. Before we let you go, Padraic, you do your own podcast, The Humble Coach.
Yes.
Feel free to plug that yourself on social media, anything like that there. Just let yourself wrap up there now.
Yeah, so
you're running your own kind of
so
like you've about 60 episodes there now. Listen to
62 at the minute. Yeah, I finished one yesterday. All right, with Owen Bradley is really good chat. So I've been enjoying it now. The last few years, I kind of got stuck into it. It's the Humble Coach podcast, available on I think the majority of podcast places. I'm always really bad for remembering, like, is it on there and on there and there? And I think it's on Spotify and Podbean as the main place, and then iTunes as the kind of main spots, but Spotify is the big one. I also, so I work as the head coach in CrossFit Galway. So if anybody's tipping around Galway and they want to get involved in CrossFit, give me a shout. Any of the DM options are reasonably good. I also own a company called The Performance Path, which is my online coaching company as well. So that's kind of a bit more aimed towards, I suppose, people who have some level of experience and some gym experience, and it's just a way to help them push on their skills and push on their abilities and certain help them work on certain areas that they might be under pressure with, injury wise or strength wise and stuff like that, and skill wise. So that's just another option to kind of play with. But yeah, any other ways you can get in touch, I'd be happy to go for. Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks a million for your time, Padraic, and I'd highly recommend your episode. I think it was actually done over 2 episodes with Paul Kilgannon, because he's a bit mad, but his ideas are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, Paul's fantastic. I must actually get onto him again. I was only onto him the last day. I have to get him back on for another one, but hopefully it won't be. It was a really long one, that one, but it was brilliant.
Well worth it because he's absolutely class. No, thank you very much, Padraic, for your time, and keep an eye out for us, and hopefully in the future, when we get up around the 62 episode mark, we'll try and have you back on again to talk about how CrossFit has evolved.
I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much for that. And it's class. The episodes are really great so far, so keep it up. You'll get there, no doubt at all.